people understand and make use of it. So right now we have a lot of different data sets that we're collecting and publishing on our website, which is quiverquant.com. But one of the big ones that has been really relevant lately, and I know that you've been thinking a lot about here within Congress, is the data that we collect on congressional stock trading. So looking at how members of Congress are managing their own finances and then going out and making trades within the market. So yeah, I guess really glad that you invited us down here to kind of speak with you, and I guess we'd love to get a little bit more of your perspective maybe on why congressional stock trading is such a big issue and something that you're thinking about solving.
Well, I think you've been such a strong voice on it. I've proposed a bill to ban congressional stock trading and to make it that if people are engaged, or family members engaged in trading, that it's in a trust so that they're not engaged in the trades. And there are a number of bills like that, and part of your work helped inform it, because your work has shown, unfortunately, that there's some members and senators who at certain times have gamed the system. And we saw this after COVID when it really came to my attention. I've been always against PAC money, lobbyist money, and never taken it, and always was talking about let's get money out of politics. But then when I was talking about that, people said, well, what about stock trading? And especially after COVID and what happened with those senators. But talk a little bit about your data, because I think you've said so much transparency on this. And when we were talking earlier, you said that you've noticed in certain cases very unusual, hard to explain behavior that makes you suspicious of what's going on.
Yeah, I'd say that there's kind of a couple of big ways that manifests. I think first of all, there's the question of whether members of Congress are taking inside information that they have and then going out and making trades on that before that information becomes known to the general public. Obviously, like, insider trading is bad regardless of who does it, but I think especially when it's members of Congress who are supposed to be putting their full attention towards serving their constituents, going out there and making stock trades on inside information is particularly bad. Like you mentioned, this is something that we saw a lot around COVID, where a lot of members of Congress received information in these confidential briefings about the spread of COVID really early on, and then some of them went off and sold a lot of their stock positions shortly after that. But I think not only the fact that they might be trading preceding big events happening, that they have confidential information, but also I think the way that it affects their legislating after they take these positions. So, obviously if a member of Congress has these big bets placed in specific companies, or maybe they have a very concentrated position within certain industries, there's a chance that affects the way that they go out and make their decisions on a day-to-day basis of what bills to vote on, what companies to be considering for government contracts. These people hold a lot of power, and if they're, have these conflicts of interest between how they manage their portfolio versus how they manage their constituents, I think it makes it particularly difficult to be very confident that they're acting in the best interest of the public.
And that's the issue, is an issue of trust. I mean, you shouldn't have members of Congress sitting on these committees, regulating these companies, and then going and trading and making stock bets on things that they're trading. Now, my experience, and tell me what your data shows, is that a lot of people probably aren't doing it out of corruption, but it's created this huge trust deficit, and we've got to fix that trust deficit. And there's no good reason that members of Congress should be allowed to trade. But one of the things I found interesting about your data is you said that in certain cases you have found that this isn't always with the best intentions, that there's really suspicious activity. And whether you want to name names or not, it's up to you, but you have detected some of these patterns, right?
Yeah, I think it's definitely tough to identify in specific case-by-case instances whether it's necessarily someone acting in malfeasance versus maybe someone just accidentally, maybe their financial advisor happened to make a trade based on, completely different information that wasn't something that was privileged to a member of Congress. So it's very tough, case by case, to definitively say this was someone acting with bad intent versus this was someone just acting innocently. But across the board, we very consistently see instances of things that look sketchy, that look fishy, and even if it's hard to say 100% in each instance whether or not it is, just the fact that question's even being raised, I think really leads us to say, why is this even something that's permissible in the first place? Why not just ban it outright. Because like you said, it leads to distrust from the public, and it makes it, I think, more difficult for these institutions to really operate if people don't trust that the members of Congress are acting in their best interest.
Without naming names, what are the types of trading activity that you've noticed that has raised flags for you?
Yeah, I think anytime that we see someone trading in a specific industry that's very core to areas that they're governing, or where they serve on committees that specifically oversee these companies, anytime that happens, it definitely raises a red flag. Anytime that a member of Congress takes out a very large outsized position within a specific company, especially if it's a small cap company, I think a lot of times that makes us think that, what reason would this person have to be trading in this small name, unless if there was some personal tie there or some personal information that they gathered. And obviously, case by case, there are other reasons why people might be trading in small companies, but that's definitely something that I think makes us look a little bit more closely into a trade that happened. I guess on top of that, when trading happens in companies within people's home districts, sometimes that becomes a little bit, more fishy. Obviously, a lot of times when budgets are being put together, people give preference towards companies within their district. So if on top of that, a politician also has very large personal holdings within a company, it can lead to perverse incentives there. But yeah, I'd say that those are some of the big things we look at.
So I've introduced a bill to ban stock trading. Abigail Spanberger has done it. You have Chip Roy, a bipartisan consensus on it. You have about 70 members who are on it. And people say, well, is it just posturing or do they really want it banned? I said, either way, we just will take the co-sponsors. But why is there a disconnect? When I go out, I talk to folks like you, people say we want this activity to be banned. But we only have about 15%, the last I checked, of members of Congress who are co-sponsoring this. And members of Congress usually have their ear to the ground in terms of popular opinion. Why has it been so hard to get more members on this? And the bills are very thoughtfully written. But it's no secret that my wife has money in a diversified trust, and a lot of the bills say, okay, ban the trading, but you can still have trusts, you can still have ways to ensure that there's no conflict of interest. Why are those common sense solutions not passing?
Yeah. Honestly, that's something I'd love to hear more of your perspective on, because from our perspective, you're right, the vast majority of the general public thinks that congressional stock trading is something that should not be allowed. It's a very bipartisan issue with people on both sides really against it. And also, like you said, a lot of members of Congress have come out and said, we agree this is something that needs to be acted on. And over the last couple of years, there's been maybe dozens at this point, maybe not that many, but definitely more than a handful of different bills that have been proposed to ban congressional stock trading. So it's something that members of the politicians are always bringing up, always saying this is something we need to act on. Several of the last speakers of the House have said it's going to be a priority for us to get legislation passed on this issue, but nothing has even been brought to a vote. There's the bill that you proposed, there's bills that have been proposed over the last couple of sessions, and none of it's even really been brought to the floor. So yeah, I guess we'd love to hear your perspective on kind of what you think the big roadblocks still are to getting legislation passed, and also maybe whether there's some members of Congress who will say one thing to the public, but then behind the scenes maybe not really be pushing that heavily.
Yeah, well, I think the challenge now I don't think it's hypocrisy as much, because there's so much scrutiny. If a member of Congress were to say, look, I'm co-sponsoring the bill, and then try to kill it internally, that would probably leak. But I think the challenge has been that the leadership hasn't been willing to put the bill on the floor. I think if they would put it on the floor, then force a vote. And it would be very hard, in my view, for members of Congress to vote against the bill. They're not going to vote to continue their own stock trading when this is something that so many Americans are opposed to. So I think the key is, how do we get an actual vote on it in the House? How do we get a vote on it in the Senate, where it requires 60 votes because of the filibuster? That is harder. And Senate tends to be wealthier, so more people have assets. They probably recognize it's more difficult. But like I said, the executive branch already has a lot of these rules, right? When people who are wealthy go serve in the executive branch, they are not allowed to trade, and they have rules for what their family members can or cannot do. And so I I think it's a matter of time, but I think this adds to the frustration where people feel that Washington is broken, that there's too much big money influencing us, and that's why my reform plan says let's get rid of PAC money, lobbyist money, which I don't take. Let's make sure that we have term limits, which is also something people want but hard to pass, and let's have banning stock trading as part of this.
Yeah. Yeah, no, something we've seen, I guess, is a lot of variation between some of these bills proposed, whereas some of them are very specific towards just banning congressional stock trading or just regulating congressional stock trading, and others, kind of like the framework you proposed, that add in some of these other issues, which are also very popular with the general public in terms of reforming how Congress operates. Do you have any thoughts on like the pros and cons of each of those approach? I know that like a bill that's more specific might be easier to build consensus around, but also, you know, if you're going to go to that effort of proposing a bill, maybe it's better to throw in a lot of different reforms versus just one thing.
I think we need to have a separate vote on just banning stock trading, because even though my bill has 5 reforms, I cite in that different bills like Abigail Spanberger's Trust Act or others that we could do on stock trading, because otherwise what happens is members of Congress say, oh, I would have voted to ban stock trading, but I don't agree with the term limits, that kind of saying, or I would have voted for banning stock trading, but I don't agree that Ro wants to ban members of Congress from ever becoming lobbyists. So they'll take an issue with one part of it. So I'd say let's pass a bill, and it doesn't, you know, it doesn't have to be perfect starting out, but let's just start making progress and putting things up for a vote. And my sense is just seeing the extraordinary following you have among people in the country on TikTok, on Instagram, on Twitter, is that this is something that people would get behind if Congress did this. It would start to restore our trust, and for politicians who voted for it, it would be good in terms of building trust with community members.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess one of the promising things that we have seen is not only has there been, I think, lower quantities of congressional stock trading occurring over the last year or so, especially at the start of 2024, we've kind of seen historically low number of trades being reported, which I think is partially just due to the more attention being put on this information and this data, more people paying attention to it. Maybe, like you said, kind of putting more pressure on members of Congress not to be acting in bad ways with their trading. But also some of the members of Congress who maybe had the most egregious examples of potential insider trading have either left office or been voted out. So yeah, I definitely think that like the attention that's being put on this has been a step in the right direction. I think having a bill to ban it outright would be obviously the end goal. But do you have any recommendations for like members of the general public aside from just paying attention to this data? Any recommendations?
Well, follow your account. I'd say, well, no, because you are bring transparency to it, and you force people to have disclosures. And I've had to have disclosures with the Stock Act every month. It's not that hard to do. And I said for a long time, members of Congress weren't even disclosing things. Yeah. And then you're analyzing the data, and then you're not making any conclusions. You're letting the public make their own conclusions. But I actually think that what we need is a ban and a mechanism for then how to deal with people, whether it's blind trust, diversified trust, whatever the executive branch has. But absent that, we need transparency, because that is making it much harder to manipulate the system. I don't think you would have senators today, if there were another crisis, call their brokers and tell them, go sell off my stock. And I'm not accusing anyone of doing something illegal, but it was very, very suspicious what happened. To me, now we know that there are accounts like yours, members know that that's happening, and that's, even if it's not illegal, do they want an analysis by your firm where they're on the front page of the New York Times? Mm-hmm. And so I do think that what you're doing is adding tremendous value.
Thank you. Yeah, so I guess, other than that, are there any like big takeaways you have for the general public just about next steps in Congress trading? Like, should we expect within the next, couple of sessions here something to be brought to the floor, or are you a little bit more pessimistic about how long it might take for real action to happen on this issue?
I'm hopeful. Look, I'm working across the aisle with people like Matt Gaetz and Chip Roy to try to get a floor vote. I hope Speaker Johnson will put this bill up for a vote. Mm-hmm. Say, it doesn't have to be my bill. It can be Abigail Spanberger's bill. It can be Chip Roy's bill. Just something that bans stock trading and have an up or down vote on it. I don't see why that's a hard thing to get in the Congress. And then I'd like to go after some of the other reforms, not have corporate PAC or any PAC money for members of Congress, not have lobbyist money for Congress, tell members of Congress they shouldn't become lobbyists. You can't sit on the Armed Services Committee and then go work for the companies that you were regulating, have term limits, have some Supreme Court ethics. But my view is political reform is such a bipartisan issue that so many Americans want, and it can help restore trust in our government. It can help us really restore integrity and let people know that we're in it for the public good, which I actually think most people are. But it has there's the temptations that people face, and also the public perception that is so low. But I'll give you the last word. I mean, I've admired your work. I appreciate the transparency you brought. I appreciate the movement that you're helping build so that eventually we do get this, hopefully in this term, if not after the presidential election, that we get this passed. What would be your words? I mean, you've been at this now many years. It's probably been frustrating to see we're not getting a vote. How do you stay engaged in it, and why are you passionate about it?
Yeah, I think we've definitely been passionate from day one just about providing transparency into this data, and I think there's always really interesting things happening that I think not only give you a better sense of how maybe politicians are thinking about what's going on within the world, but also how things are going on within the markets. Obviously, I think it's something that we would like to cut out, and I think there's definitely been great steps in that direction. But until then, I guess I just advise for the public to continue keeping your eye on this data, continuing calling, contacting your members of representatives, letting them know that this is an issue that really needs to be acted on. And then on top of just the congressional trading, I think there's, like you mentioned, kind of next steps to be taken after that to continue cutting out the influence of money in politics and really cutting out some of the adverse incentives that some members of Congress might have to not be acting in the best interest of the public. So yeah, from my perspective, I think just keep your eye on the data, continue contacting members of Congress, and hopefully we can help change things for the better.
Well, I appreciate it. I appreciate your work. Appreciate Quiver Quantitative's transparency. And look forward to working with you to try to get this done.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Nice.
How did it go?
Looked good. Really good. People kept sending